Now, the Democratic Alliance is unhappy with the powers President Cyril Ramaphosa has given to Electricity Minister Kgosientsho Ramokgopa. The party says the country now has two ministers in charge of the Electricity Regulation Act. The DA says this will exacerbate the confusion between the two ministers. It adds that the overlapping powers will also fuel the continuation of mixed messaging in the midst of a national electricity crisis. Let's speak to the DA's Shadow Minister of Electricity, Samantha Graham-Mare, joining us from Cape Town. Thank you so much for your time, Samantha. We do appreciate it. Maybe let's just start off with what exactly you are unhappy with. It seems as though there was immense pressure for President Cyril Ramaphosa to actually make it very clear what the Minister of Electricity can and cannot do. In a briefing on Monday outside of Kusile Power Station, he said that discussions have been had with Minister Gwede Mantashe and Minister Pravin Gordhan. But what exactly are you unhappy about? What's the confusion?
Thanks very much for having me, Heidi. I appreciate it, and good evening to everybody who's watching. Heidi, so in terms of the proclamation, the minister has been granted powers in terms of Section 34(1) of the Electricity Regulation Act. So he's been granted powers in terms of identifying new and needed infrastructure to address the load shedding crisis. He's allowed to identify the types and sources of power that's required, to whom and how they will be sold, and also in terms of procurement, tendering processes, and bringing in the private sector. But then it goes on to give him powers in terms of Section 34(2), and it says, but excluding subsections A to E. Now, Section 34(2) of the Electricity Regulation Act only goes from A to E. So, in other words, the whole statement in terms of Section 34(2) is redundant. So we're not entirely sure what his powers are, because at the end of the day, the powers that he's been granted in terms of Section 34(1) actually predominantly fall within the realm of Gwede Mantashe. For example, the identification of the energy mix that would be required to address the load shedding crisis falls within the IRP. Now, the IRP, we have one from 2019. It should have been reviewed in 2021. We've been told by Minister Mantashe that we'll get it in the second quarter of this year. And then we were advised later that we'll only get it by the end of the year. But that has already identified the energy mix that's required. So again, all of that falls within Gwede Mantashe's purview and not within the new ministers. So we're not entirely sure what he's actually going to be responsible for, because there's very little power that he's been given. In addition, any form of procurement would require a budget. Who would he be instructing to procure? He doesn't have a department. He doesn't account to anybody. So we're not entirely sure. This has created more questions than it has created answers.
Certainly, and at the end of the day, South Africans are, when I tweeted about the president's announcement of giving Ramokgopa more powers and making his role clear, many said we still don't have electricity. But I want us to further discuss the issue around the further challenges that this is going to bring about, especially between the two ministers. Many were saying that that is actually not the challenge here, and people should not bring about issues between Gwede Mantashe and the Minister of Electricity, but there is clearly no clear line as to what Gwede needs to do, or there is a clear line as to what Gwede needs to do, but now there's no real clear line as to what Minister Ramokgopa needs to do. So how is this further going to complicate things, especially when it comes to procuring emergency electricity, which we've heard the President speak about, how we need to urgently procure emergency electricity to deal with this energy crisis?
So, Heidi, at the end of the day, what has happened in terms of this proclamation is that this has actually further entrenched Gwede Mantashe's assertion that Dr. Ramokgopa is nothing more than a project manager, because he literally does not have the power to procure. The regulator is the only one who's allowed to issue declarations. Only the minister is protected from, the Minister Gwede Mantashe is protected from the tender requirements. So at the end of the day, there's no real clarity around what his role is going to be. He will be swanning around the country, visiting power stations, and has no capacity to actually enact anything under this new regulation. So the issue we have here is that Gwede is still going to be in control of the energy sector, we have a minister that we're paying for. He's not accountable to anybody. There's no department that he reports to, who literally has no powers whatsoever. So I think the issue that we're facing here is there is no way that any of this has done anything to alleviate the energy crisis. In fact, if anything, we just created another level of bureaucracy and funding that has no results.
So you mentioned the issue about who is he accountable to, and I think many were expecting that the Minister of Electricity would have to answer to President Cyril Ramaphosa. If I'm not mistaken, he is the Minister of Electricity in the presidency, so surely he has to be accountable to Ramaphosa. Is that not the case?
Well, that would be the case, but at the end of the day, Parliament is required to do oversight over the executive. So we can't have a minister that doesn't report to any parliamentary committee, which is why Kevin Milam, my colleague, proposed that we have an ad hoc committee that would then do the oversight over Dr. Ramokgopa, so that at least he was reporting to Parliament. So currently, under the presidency, he will now report. There's a new parliamentary portfolio committee that was established today, which is falls under the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation. So he will effectively report to that committee, but it's not a proper committee. It doesn't oversee a department. He has no budget. He has no real powers in terms of what the proclamation says. So, yes, he reports to the president, and then the president reports to Parliament. But we've been told that the oversight will then be managed in terms of quarterly questions to him in the open sessions of Parliament. That's not enough for somebody who's supposed to be resolving the biggest crisis this country faces.
Certainly, and that's the big issue here, Samantha, isn't it? That at the end of the day, South Africans still sit in rolling blackouts. South Africans still don't have reliable electricity supply. Just in closing, what exactly do you propose moving forward? I know you've mentioned an ad hoc committee and a committee that the minister can answer to, but what else are you proposing be done here to basically clear the lines between the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy and the Minister of Electricity, because there's no Department of Electricity?
That's correct. So, Heidi, in the first place, we never agreed with the appointment of Dr. Ramokgopa. If you're going to have a Minister of Electricity, then you need to have a Department of Electricity. It doesn't help to have a minister who sits in three different departments. So he's under Public Enterprises, which manages Eskom. He falls under the Ministry of Mineral Resources and Energy, because that deals with energy policy and independent power producers. And then he falls under the DPME, because that's the Ministry of the Presidency. So you've got somebody who's in essence overseeing three different departments, but accountable to none. What we would like to see is that he manages NECOM and the Energy Action Plan as he's been assigned to do, but also that we have clarity on who's going to be responsible for the implementation of the the JET-P, which is $8.5 billion worth of funding that's coming into this country to assist with the just energy transition. We have no clarity yet on who's responsible for that. So we would like him to then maybe take the lead in that and oversee that process, which would then allow him to procure independent power producers. He would have the funding to do the just energy transition, and we would move that then into one central directorate that he could then manage and oversee with responsibility to an ad hoc committee.
Certainly. I mean, at the end of the day, this is all just very confusing. As much as the president has released a statement clarifying the role of the Minister of Electricity, I think many are still slightly confused. It would be interesting to hear what the Minister of Electricity has to say about the statement from the president. But thank you so much for your time this evening. We do appreciate it. That is Samantha Graham-Mare, who is the DA's Shadow Minister of Electricity.